This is a 2011 Lexus LFA. It was an exotic supercar produced by Lexus with only 500 units made for the entire world. And when it was new, back in 2011, the base sticker price was $375,000. Now, a supercar from Lexus is a little bit weird, so I kind of figured the values of these would drop like a stone. But today, the average asking price for an LFA on AutoTrader is $388,000. Today, we're going to find out why. I've borrowed this LFA from Audi Bridgewater here in New Jersey, where it's owned by the owner of the dealership. And today, I'm going to find out what makes this thing so valuable. I'm going to start by showing you around it, giving you a tour of all of its cool features and its unusual quirks, and then I'm going to take it out on the road and find out how the LFA drives. And at the end, I'm going to give it a Doug score. For more of my thoughts on the LFA, click the link below to go to autotrader.com/oversteer, where I've also compiled a list of the most unusual Lexus models currently on sale. Now, on to the quirks, but first, a quick overview. The LFA was a halo car for Lexus, intended to show people the brand was getting serious about performance. And serious it was. It used a 4.8-liter V10 with 553 horsepower and 354 pound-feet of torque, mated to a sequential automatic transmission. It did 0 to 60 in 3.9 seconds, and it could hit a top speed of 202 miles an hour. And Lexus only made 500 for the whole world. And yes, the LFA cost nearly $400,000 back in 2011. And yet, nobody ever really talks about this car like they do Ferrari, Lamborghini, and other exotic cars. More on that in a few minutes. Now, on to the quirks. Now I'm going to start by showing off all the weird quirks and features of the LFA's interior, starting with its trunk. Now you may have thought that this was the LFA's trunk back here, but it isn't. It turns out the LFA is actually a hatchback. I had no idea. The glass opens. In order to release the glass, there's no button on the key fob to release it. There's actually a little button inside the interior. You push it, and this pops open, and you can open it up. And once you open it up, you'll discover the most ridiculous do-it-yourself cargo cover you'll ever see in a $400,000 car. It doesn't even cover all the cargo. In this particular model, underneath that cargo cover are all the books and manuals. There are many of them. And there are some gems in these things. For one thing, the sheer number of books and papers and manuals and guides you get with this car is absolutely unbelievable. This here is the LFA Introduction and Orientation Manual. This here, inside the LFA. This, the owner's manual. And here's the navigation system owner's manual. And it just continues. This is only about a quarter of the stuff that's in there. My personal favorite thing, however, is this. This is a laminated pamphlet that tells you how to wash your LFA, and there are some very specific restrictions. For example, it says, do not use automatic car washes, as they may scratch the vehicle body, damage the paint, and may spray water where it should not be sprayed. There are actually some instructions in here on where you shouldn't spray water, specifically the rear and the front on top of the hood. It says, do not aim the head of the nozzle at the hood grills or radiator grills. Doing so may negatively affect the engine. This pamphlet goes on. There's 3 sides to it, front and back, about washing your LFA. This thing will add value one day at the classic car auctions in the future. Now, speaking of the trunk, it's not exactly huge. This isn't a car I would take on really long road trips, but it does come with that cool LFA bag that holds all the stuff, and that would be just about the coolest thing you can carry on an airplane. Oh yeah, I got my LFA bag. Yeah, I got an LFA, no big deal. Next up, I swear I'm talking about the interior of the car. I'm going to move on to visibility, and specifically this window, which is the smallest window I've ever seen in any car, bar none. I don't even know why this is a window. It's only an inch high at its highest point. And the funny thing is, half of it is taken up by all these DOT numbers and the Lexus logo. This is the smallest window you will ever see. It does nothing to add to the car's visibility. Next up, I'm inside the car. I'm going to talk about the seat controls, which may look strange at first glance, but they're just about the most intuitive seat controls I've ever seen. You want the seat to go back? Push it back. You want the seat to come forward? Pull it forward. It's actually really simple, and it works really well. I wish all cars had this. Also down here is the heated seat controls, 0, 1, 2, 3, and there's a little button you can press if you want to access the area behind the seats, which is pretty small. The next interesting thing about this car is the seat belts. You'll notice as soon as you get inside, you don't really pull it over your shoulder. Instead, the belt part is already down here. You just pull it across your waist and you buckle yourself in. Now, one of the other things you'll notice about this seat belt is it's a little thicker than a normal seat belt. That's because this car is one of the first to have inflatable seat belts with an airbag in them, and it'll actually detonate in an accident to keep you safer, just like an airbag in your steering wheel. Moving on to the center of the interior, one of the cool things about the LFA is you get this little plaque that tells you which number your LFA is. Now, some exotic car companies lie about how many units of each exotic car they make in order to make the car seem more exclusive than it actually is. I'm not going to name names because I don't want to get sued. But the LFA has its number out of the sequence of 500 right here in the middle, and anytime you want to feel special, you can just glance at it. Take a look. Next up, we got to talk about turn signal stalks. There's nothing like getting an LFA to review and talking about turn signal stalks, but these are kind of cool. They are the thinnest turn signal stalks I've ever seen in any modern car, designed that way presumably so they don't get in the way with the shift paddles. More importantly, they're really high quality. They don't move around or jiggle when they're not supposed to. They're really stuck in there, so they don't move unless you actually want to move them. You touch these things all the time, so it gives you a real feeling of quality in this car. Now, speaking of the shift panels, that's another strange element in this car. First off, they're on the steering column instead of the steering wheel, and that is how it should be done. The column, they don't move when you're in a turn, so you always know exactly where the downshift and upshift paddle is going to be. But that's not the strange part about these things. The strange part is how they work. When you turn the car on, it's in neutral. In order to get it to go, you have to actually pull the right paddle, the plus paddle. There's no PRND drive selector in the middle. Instead, you pull the right paddle and then you're in first. Now, let's say you want to get it back into neutral. Pull both paddles. That's pretty common in cars like this. The unusual thing is what happens when you want to get it into reverse. Look all around the interior and you will not find the button for reverse. Reverse gear is over here on the left of the steering column. You pull it toward you only when you're in neutral and the car goes into reverse. The other crazy thing, if you're in reverse and you want to go back into first, you can't go directly. You have to go reverse, neutral, and then pull the right paddle and you're back in first. And that's the strange and interesting tale of the Lexus LFA shift paddles. But one of the things I like most about this car is the gauge cluster. Now these days, every exotic car has a gauge cluster that changes color and shape and size based on whatever mode you're in, but this car pioneered all that. The way it works in this car is cooler than most cars even today. Push this little button on the steering wheel and the entire tachometer shifts over to give you some menu options. Now in most cars it's all digital, but in this thing it's both digital and an actual physical tachometer that shifts over. It looks really cool. When you put it in sport mode, the tachometer completely changes from a regular normal one to a sportier, more aggressive one with red and white. The other cool thing I noticed the LFA does when you put it in sport mode, it just skips a couple of the numbers at the bottom of the tachometer. You no longer need to know when you're at 1,000 or 3,000 RPM. That doesn't matter. All you have to do is focus on the top part. Finally, another cool thing the gauge cluster does is when you turn off the car, everything sort of turns off one by one until the last things go away, the tachometer needle and then the gear you're in, and then it's all gone. It's very cool. It seems like the future. The other really cool thing about the gauge cluster in this car is that the red line is variable based on how warm the car is. So when you first turn on, it's right around 6,000 RPM, and you can see that it just inches up little by little. Right now the car is fully warm, and so the red line is close to 9,000 RPM, and it just does that over time. That is a really cool idea that very few other cars do. Another one of my favorite features of this car is these buttons in the center. When you're driving along and the stereo's off, these buttons don't say anything. They're just unlabeled buttons, and you're thinking, what do those do? Then you press the power button to turn on the stereo and they all come to life. That might be a little bit of a gimmick, but I personally think it is a really cool party trick, and I love playing with that stereo on-off button. Next up is the rear spoiler. Now it deploys when you're driving the car, and it comes up pretty frequently at some speed, I don't know what, but in all of these cars there's always a button that you can use to manually raise the spoiler if you just want to drive around and have everybody look at you. Where is that button in this car? Take a look around and try to find it. You will not. Turns out Lexus hid that button all the way back here behind the driver's seat. You gotta really want people to stare at you if you want to put the spoiler up. But if you want to, push the button and the spoiler rises right up in back. I don't know why they hid it behind the driver's seat, but that's where it is. The last cool interior quirk is on the dashboard surrounding the gauge cluster. Those thin steering wheel stalks, you can't put a lot of stuff on them. So some of the stuff you normally find on steering wheel stalks is instead in these cool little switches around the gauge cluster. For example, on the left, you'll find the headlights. You turn them on by moving the switch. On the right, I've already showed you where the drive mode selector is. And below that, you have the gauge cluster brightness switch. And below that, you have the windshield intermittent wiper timing switch. That's kind of cool. Next up, we're going to cover some of the car's more unusual exterior quirks, starting with the fuel door. You open it from the inside just like a normal fuel door and it pops open, but when you actually look at it, you'll notice that there's a place where you put the fuel and a place where you put the windshield washer fluid, which is very unusual. I'd love to get one of these outside AutoZone and start dumping windshield washer fluid in the fuel door and see if people run out and get all freaked out that I'm destroying it. Next up, we move under the hood. Now, the engine in this car is very beautiful, and Lexus has done a pretty good job of not covering it with too much plastic so that you can really look at it and check it out. Maybe the most interesting thing under the hood, though, is the fact that you pay $400,000 for one of these and the hood doesn't stay up automatically. In fact, there's not even one of those built-in hood props you just pull up and then it's up. You actually have to undo the hood prop from the top of the hood and then stick it in place yourself. That's a little out of place in a $400,000 car. Another exterior quirk is the windshield wipers. Now you'll notice there's one giant windshield wiper. Well, it turns out there's also a little baby windshield wiper too, and they're on the same wiper arm, so they're just both along for the ride. They do a pretty good job of covering the whole window though. And finally, we have to talk about the keys. Walk up to this car and you'll notice that despite its beautiful futuristic shape covered with carbon fiber, low-slung, exotic look, there's a regular old keyhole in the door. There's also a regular old keyhole on this side in the passenger door. And you want to know why that is? It's because this car, as far advanced as it is, had regular old keys. Maybe more surprising is the fact that the keyless entry system isn't built into the key like it is on most normal modern cars. Instead, there's a key and a separate key fob. I really wasn't expecting that. It's the only part of this car that seems old school. And speaking of the keys, we have to move back to the interior for a second because this car has both a real key and an engine start button. So the way it works is you stick the real key into the ignition like in a normal car, and only then can you press the engine start button. When you want to turn off, just turn off the key like a regular car, rendering the engine start button kind of an unnecessary little gimmick. So the LFA is rather quirky in a cool way, which is no surprise considering this is a first effort supercar from Lexus, which is a brand that isn't really known for supercars. But does the LFA drive like a $400,000 car? Time to find out. This is a little scary. That sound, it's like a Formula One car. Yeah. That is crazy. Did you hear that? Wow, that is one of the great sounds. I haven't said anything yet. The sound is just like taking me over. I can't believe it. I've heard these before from the outside, but oh my God, that sound is unbelievable. That is unbelievable. That is the best sounding car I've ever heard in my life. I've been driving this car 2 minutes. Yeah. I swear this is the best sounding car I've ever heard. This is the kind of car that the people in this area call the cops even though we're going like 30, just because they hear it. So I have it in normal mode, which is good. It's actually, the ride is pretty rough even in normal. Here we go, we're gonna try this. Wow, it's so fast. It is so fast. But the transmission dulls the experience a little bit because it just doesn't provide that immediate upshift like a modern dual clutch does. However, when you get into those high revs, you hear that sound. All right, we're in a nice corner here. Wow. Holds the line very well. It's very planted. There's no body roll at all. The steering's a little more vague than you want, a little less precise. With every generation of these supercars, things just get a little bit better and a little bit better. And this being a Lexus, I kind of didn't think it would have the most precise steering, and that's true. The car is very planted to the ground like you'd expect. Wow. The sound, I just can't. Man, that's just incredible. I can't believe, especially, that sound is coming out of a Lexus. I looked down and like, Lexus? Like my dad has an RX. Yeah. It doesn't sound quite like that. The transmission is too slow. It's just, it's not quite. But the thing is about this car, it's important to remember when you're thinking about that. At the time, 2011-12, they didn't have dual clutch to handle this much power. Nobody was doing that. Now with dual clutches and everything, you feel like it's a little bit behind. The steering is, yeah, it's not quite as precise. You can just feel the front end is a little lighter than in some modern cars, and the steering is just a little lighter. It isn't vague by any means, but in a Huracan, you turn it, it goes pew, and this car is not quite like that. It's wildly fast. But the thing is, the speed is almost the second story to this car, to the sound. I cannot believe how it sounds. Now we're just on like a street. The thing is, if we're going 37 miles an hour, and you still hear like the faintest little bit of that sound, and you're like, I should be doing more than this. Man, the ride is rough on rough roads. Even, I'm having comfort mode right now, and the ride is like, this isn't the Lexus you get in if you want to just go to the store. There are a lot of other Lexuses for that. Ferrari's a Ferrari, and those are always going to be cool, but there's something a little bit more unique about this car. The question then becomes $400,000. I mean, that's an enormous amount of money. But you know, the thing about cars like this is it's not like someone's like, oh, should I get a Camry or this? They usually have 20 cars, and they're like, yeah, I'll add that. And so to people like that, yeah, it probably is worth $400,000. It's another name in the collection, and there's only 500 of these in the entire world. You know, if I saw this car, I would flip. Like, here's an RX. This guy has no idea, right? Nobody has any idea. It's kind of funny. This is probably the $400,000 car that you can drive and get the least amount of attention if you want. And so that's the Lexus LFA. It's surprisingly fast and fun to drive, and most importantly, it has the single best exhaust note of any car I've ever driven. It's hard to say that any car is worth $400,000, but this car certainly has some traits of some of the very best cars I've ever reviewed, and yet nobody really talks about it in the same breath as Ferrari or Lamborghini. They probably should. And now, on to the Doug score.
Starting with the weekend category, specifically styling. The LFA is a bold car, it's an aggressive car, but it's not a beautiful car. I never hated how it looks like some people do, but I never loved it. Still, it warrants a 6. Acceleration, the LFA does 0 to 60 in 3.9 seconds, which earns it an 8. Handling is good, but not among the very best due to its slightly vague steering. It gets another 8. The cool factor is undisputed. It may not be on the level of the LaFerrari, but it's not far off, and it earns a rare 9. As for importance, whether you'd put the LFA in a museum, it's definitely up there, though not at the very top of the significance pyramid, so it earns an 8. That makes the total weekend score 39 out of 50, easily trouncing the only other car that's been Doug scored, my Range Rover. Next up are the daily categories, starting with features. The LFA has some cool stuff, but it's missing the latest tech from the most modern cars, and the key thing is a disappointment. It earns a 6. Luxury measures how smooth and comfortable the car is. The LFA has very comfortable seats, but a surprisingly harsh ride, earning it only a 5. Quality measures reliability and materials, and the LFA has few equals. Its interior quality is top-notch, and while it's hard to assess actual LFA reliability, we know Lexus's reputation. Still, there's the occasional drawback, like that cheap exterior keyhole and high servicing costs. It earns a 9. For practicality, it has about 5 cubic feet of storage space, and therefore it gets a 2. Finally, value. This is an amazing car with an amazing sound, but it's hard to justify $400,000 given its aging transmission, imperfect steering, and controversial styling, not to mention the L on the front instead of a prancing horse or a raging bull. It earns a 4, bringing its total daily score to 26. Just shy of the Range Rover, no surprise, as this car wasn't really designed for daily driving.
And that brings the total Doug score to 65, vastly superior to my Range Rover, the best car I've ever Doug scored, but since it's only the second car I've ever Doug scored, also the second worst. We'll get some more context for that number in the future as I review more cars.